So, welcome to class. Today's class is going to be about kind of distinguishing between back movements and leg movements. And this should have a benefit to your yoga practice for those watching who are really into yoga. And it should also have a benefit to a strength training practice if you are, for example, learning how to deadlift or aiming to lift heavier weights. The typical props that I love using for class are at least one block and a blanket. I try to keep props as minimalist as possible, but still engaging with them and using them when I teach. But today I would like you to have a some kind of dowel on hand. So this is an old curtain rod and it doesn't quite work the way it was supposed to. But anyway, so I've got this dowel. You could have a Swiffer or a broomstick. So whatever you've got in your home, but have that nearby. Okay, so we'll be able to use that as well. Block, blanket. Let's just start as always in a seated meditation. And very often I start cross-legged, but you may want to sit on a block. This is known as diamond position, diamond sit position, also known as Virasana or Vajrasana, depending on the exact placement of your feet. Because I'm sitting on a block between my feet with a blanket on top of it, um, I am, my feet are a little bit out to the side. They're not tucked completely under me, but I would just give caution for anybody who is really comfortable sitting with your feet way out to the side, that I think that that's rather hard on the knees over time if you spend any significant time in that position. So let's get comfortable wherever you are. Make sure that's a comfortable position. And then roll your shoulders a little bit. Bring one hand to the chest and one hand to the belly. And even before we close our eyes, we're going to do a little bit of cat and cow here in seated. So here I am rounding my spine. That's the cat shape. Here I am going into back bend. That's the cow shape. And I can actually feel myself rocking to the back of my sitting bones and to the front of my sitting bones. So notice if you can feel that in yourself. And then find your most neutral position, the center of your sitting bones. Feel that the rib cage is right over the pelvis, that the ears are right over the rib cage. And something that I teach a lot is the ring of the bottom ring of the ribs is over the ring of the pelvis, because you could be into a back bend and still feel like your rib cage is over your pelvis. But specifically, we want to look at the rings, bottom of the rib cage, top of the rib cage, and the pelvis. So hand to the chest, hand to the belly. Allow the eyes to close and drop into this moment right now. You've got this. Even those of you who think that you are not good at meditation, I've got news for you. There is no such thing as being good at meditation. Meditation, like yoga, is a practice, and it's helping us to hopefully get good at life, get good at staying rooted in our values, in our boundaries, rooted in kindness, but also clarity. And we can all grow in all of those respects. Just noticing where your thoughts go, staying as present as possible. One more round of breath. And when you're ready, crack open your eyes. Maybe do that with timing with your inhale. And we're going to slowly release the hands and come down onto our backs for this first part of our active practice today. So have your knees bent and place your hands on your abdomen or maybe the front of your pelvis. and feet flat to the floor. So, what I want you just to take stock of is the parts of your back that are touching the floor. And this is probably your neutral or your default position. If you feel a big gap between your rib cage, the lowest ribs, and the floor, then you may want to work on getting your rib cage to snuggle backwards. If you feel a really big gap in your low back, a little bit of a gap is normal here, but a really big gap in your low back, if you could slide your whole hand under, you may want to work on your pelvic positioning. And so bringing your hands to the front of the pelvis, the bony parts of the front of the pelvis, start to roll the pelvis this way. So tipping the bowl of the pelvis backwards gets your low back flattened to the floor a bit more. And wherever you are, just take a full breath. Notice also how your rib cage expands on the floor. This is a really important part of transferring weight through our body, is making sure that our torso can efficiently transfer load from our legs up to our arms or our arms down to our legs, right? So not just belly breathing, but side rib breathing, back body breathing, chest breathing, upper neck area breathing, all of the ways that we can breathe. And then with most of your back in a nice snug position on the floor, you have the floor as your biofeedback. We're going to start to march the legs. I'm looking at a little spot on my ceiling, keeping the eyes soft, focusing my gaze, which is known as drishti in yoga. And as the legs move, I feel a little bit of a difference in the weight in my low back. So, for example, as my right leg lifts up, I feel more weight in the right side of my low back, which is normal. And as the left leg lifts up, I feel more weight in the left leg, left side of my low back, which is normal. Yes, exactly. Okay. And then you're going to hold both legs up. And what we were doing a moment ago probably took about 1% effort or 5% effort, depending on what's going on in your body today. This starts to ramp it up significantly. So immediately I do in myself feel this pull of my low back off the floor. So I'm working really consciously to draw my front hip points up and to maintain that neutrality of my back in the ground. And the effort that's requiring is rectus abdominis and a lot of core stuff. And so now I'm going to tap one tiptoes down, then the other from this 90-90 position. And please join me if you also need to take a break and take a deep breath. If you were holding your breath as I was a moment ago. Reset, realign, and recommit to keeping your spine neutral. So if your foot can come down all the way to the floor, but not without your back going along for the ride, then come on back to your neutral back position and then only let your foot go part way. Okay? Your hands are somewhere in your torso to give you a little bit of feedback. They could be under the low back, they could be on the front of the belly. Yesterday, I was in the gym and I saw somebody doing those leg lowers, right? And every time her legs lowered down, she arched way the heck up and her belly poofed out a ton. And I just thought to myself, that is not doing what she thinks it's doing. She was possibly fortifying her hip flexors. That could be the thing. But she was not at all fortifying her trunk or creating conditions for more stable movement pattern in once she got up and left the gym. And so, as a physical therapist, I will say, and other physical therapists can relate to this, it is very hard to be in that situation where you know somebody might be hurting themselves, but it's not your job to go over and inform them. It's like, oh my goodness. It's like watching a car crash about to happen. I don't mean to exaggerate, like movement is good for us. Come back to that 90-90 position and then just go ahead and take your legs up towards the sky. You'll see that mine aren't fully straight. Don't worry if yours aren't fully straight. But like that's definitely a thing when you can observe where somebody is going and kind of bring it back in. But our self-observation is the most important thing, right? So again, we're going to work on that stability of the spine. Root down add a little bit of this balloon breath to it. So it's a forceful exhale through pursed lips. And then lower just one leg down. And as the leg lowers down, you're working your glutes, you're working everything. It's very natural, again, to have a little bit more of a loss of contact with your low back in the ground, but you don't want it to be major. You don't want it to be entirely losing contact, as I'm demonstrating right now. So you should not be able to slide your hand underneath. Other leg goes down, and if you can slide your hand underneath, then just go halfway there. So all of these movements, the initial marching, the reverse marching, and now the leg lowering one at a time, these are all asking us to distinguish between leg movement and back movement. Why would we want to distinguish between leg movement and back movement? Well, the reason is because, draw your knees to your chest, rock it a little side to side. In a nutshell, you want to distinguish between those two movements because your joints of your knee and your hip and even your ankle have a huge amount of surface area. And there are just fewer joints from the hip down than there are in the spine. That's not entirely true because your foot has a ton of joints in it, but from the ankle to the hip, basically the things that are moving when you're weight bearing for the most part, those joints have a lot of surface area compared to the joints of the spine. Bring your hands to your knees here and start to draw some circles. I learned this in like 2001, 2002 from Stephen Cope at Kripalu, and he called it sacral massage. If you have SI joint issues, which are pains usually at the back of your pelvis, this can potentially help or alleviate or help to pinpoint the origin of some of that discomfort that you might be experiencing. And let's do one more circle and find your knees in a relatively neutral, loose position here. We're gonna go into happy baby on our back, or kind of like a soft happy baby. So separate your knees a little bit wide from one another, and then slowly draw your knees up towards your armpit. There's gonna be a point, and the knees are wide, but there's gonna be a point where you notice that your tailbone really comes off the floor. Let's stay below that point. So again, distinguishing leg movement from back movement. The moment your tailbone comes off the floor, your pelvis has gone into a posterior pelvic tilt, and therefore your low back is starting to round and go into its cat shape. So if you want to, you can sort of pulse between those two positions, pulse right at the edge of that. But ultimately, I do want you to get used to keeping the tailbone sort of lengthened here. The distinction between the pelvic movement and the hip movement. So you can find out where that angle is for you, where that edge is for you. Yes. And then we're going to bring the legs back together and activate your feet. And imagine hands to the belly, one hand slides right under the low back. Imagine you're at the gym and you've got your feet on one of those press plates, right? So you are going to start to push that plate forward and then pull it back in using your legs, right? Push that weight forward and pull it back in. Add the balloon breath to help create a more like connected and firm torso, kind of firmed up from the inside out as your diaphragm kind of contracts to hold the air out. And what you're really noticing here is your back is not moving very much because it is supported and rooted into the floor. And now your legs are taking on all of this movement, right? So that's pretty exciting that we have distinguished between leg movement and back movement. Now, again, if you start to go lower, like here, you're going to feel like this leg straightening to a hover over the floor. You're going to feel your back getting more into it. So find that place that feels like a challenge, but isn't too crazy. And then draw back in, knees separate, rock a little side to side. And let's go ahead and fully rock to one side, come over onto hands and knees. And from here, I want you to separate your knees a little bit wider, and we're going to do something very similar to what we did a moment ago. One hand comes up to your low back. And if the hand that's still on the floor needs a little less pressure, just walk it out, walk it forward. So I've got my left hand on my low back, knees wider than hip distance, almost wider than shoulder distance. And I'm just trying to keep my back from moving very much. There's nothing wrong with your back moving in general, but what we're asking when we're lifting a heavy load is we're asking our legs to do most of the work. And so we need to be able to put the work in our legs. And this is one way to do it. So right now, keeping my spine neutral as I go through that full range of motion into hip flexion and closer to hip neutral. And then we're going to take it to the other side. So left hand to the floor if you're on the same side as me, right hand to your back, and start to rock a little front to back here. One of the things you may notice is that there are some back muscles that engage along the way as you rock forward and back, and that's actually perfectly normal and healthy. The thing that you don't want to feel is you don't want to feel a lot of cat action or a lot of cow action. You don't want to feel any back bend or rounding of your spine, right? Now see if you can do that while having both hands down on the floor. It's almost like there's a magnet from my sitting bones, the part of my butt that would be touching the chair, right? Going back and forth. And then fully come up and grab a hold of your block and place it under your hand. So I've got that block in the medium height. I'm going to push down into the block, kind of round my upper back a little bit, or at least let the shoulder blades round around the sides of the ribs. Back of the neck is long. It's very tempting to look forward. Lean completely over to one side. So if you lean to your right side, your left leg gets free. You're going to step your left leg forward to the outside of your hands. Now I'm going to take my block to the tall position. My legs are rather stiff today because of I rode one of the city e-bikes and it didn't have any of the electric push that it was supposed to have. So it was actually like 5 times harder than riding a regular bike. So my legs are feeling all of that. And what we're doing now is again distinguishing between hip and back movement. So we're leaning into this lunge and the spine should be staying relatively neutral. You could put your hand back there and feel how it's not changing a whole lot as you go forward and back. Your knee is doing the bending here. And then we're going to take it to the other side. So again, if you've got the block in the tall position like I do, make sure it doesn't stumble over, fall over, lower that leg down, and then slow motion take the other leg up, right? And again, lean in and out. So everything that's happening here is happening as a unit from my pelvis down. So keep going with this movement, but here's why this movement matters. Let's say I'm lowering something heavy to the ground, right? So I'm keeping my spine moving as a unit, and then I'm using that lunge of the legs to root it down and lift it up. Okay? In fact, as you make sure that your back's not moving too much here, let's all go ahead and do that next move together. So keep the same leg in front, back leg pivots a little bit. So you were initially kind of like on 2 railroad tracks. Back leg pivots, so now your back shin is not quite perpendicular to the front edge of your yoga mat, but something like that. Rise up so that you're in this proposal position, as I call it. Grab your block and hold it close to your chest. And it could literally be a book, or it could be a weight if you prefer to use a weight. So the first thing we're going to do is, like, if we were really lowering something quite heavy here, we would keep it as close to our center of gravity as possible, right? So right below the belly button, more or less, or below the solar plexus, the bottom of the rib cage. This is what that would look like. And you can see how much hip mobility is required to make that happen. Now, there's another scenario in which maybe you're having to shift forward and maybe you're having to move a weight. So if you were pushing a weight on the floor and using your legs, not your arms, you would be doing this, right? And if you were having to transition something heavy from one side of your body or one side of the yoga mat to the front side of the yoga mat using your legs, this is what that would look like. So play along with me if you'd like, keeping that spine relatively neutral. And because we don't have a lot of weight in our arms, this is a really powerful way to practice putting the movement into the legs. So this is basically ergonomics, but low to the ground. So ergonomics for people who already have a lot of mobility, okay? We're gonna come out of that, bring it right back in, and bring this knee in together, the legs together. So you've got your little full kneeling position. And again, hold your block across the chest or the solar plexus area. So butt's gonna go back and then forward and back and forward. And again, you can have one hand to your low back so that you can just feel that you're not rounding and you're not arching your back. I've got my toes curled under, by the way, which is a really good thing for many of us to start to get accustomed to if you've lost that. And this is the essence of a hip hinge. It's also the essence of a deadlift. You'll notice a couple things. Your weight has to go back in order to keep the hips active, and your legs have to work pretty darn hard. So we're going to take the block, tall position again, and because I had my right foot to the outside of the block a moment ago, I'm going to take my left foot to the outside of the block. Just make sure it's the opposite of whichever one you did before. And we already did that distinguishing of the movement forward to back, right? So now we're going to hold the weight again close to the navel or solar plexus, this imaginary weight, and slide it forward and back, or settle it down using the legs and pick it up using the legs. Now, one of the things that makes this tricky, I think, for folks who are interested in yoga, these movements can be tricky because in yoga, very often we encourage and keep doing the spine neutral thing. But in yoga, very often we encourage a bit of an extreme movement. So maybe something that looks like this in the legs, while simultaneously lifting your chest, going into a deep back bend. And so we don't do a whole lot that really honors the limits of a single joint, right? We're often using every joint we can access to get as much movement as we possibly can, or much end range of motion as we possibly can. So that's not a criticism necessarily of yoga, it's just a fact. Like, we are learning to move efficiently, and to move efficiently, very often we need to use our legs. So tap this block down to the ground below your belly button, and then also kind of pivot on your back leg, tap it behind you, keeping it close in, kind of under your navel. And again, one hand option to your low back. And then go ahead and set the block out in front of you. Place the hands on the block again. Set the front foot back, find your way to table pose, and knees wide, rock back and forth a few times. Okay, finding neutral table, you can still have your block there. It just gives you a little extra boost for this next move. Connect to your breath and then slowly step one foot to the outside of the block. Rise up. For many of us, as we go from horizontal in our spine to vertical in our spine, you're going to feel a little change in shape in your low back. And again, I'm going to say this a bunch during class, that's pretty normal. But you do want to, if you tend to have a little bit of an excessive curve back here, you do want to work on lifting your front hip points, keeping your back toes curled under, and starting to get your rib cage right over your pelvis, just like we did in the beginning of class. So connect to breath, back body, ribs, lower ring of the ribs right over the ring of the pelvis. No big back bend here, right? You're going to start to pulse forward, and don't let your back or your belly move a whole lot in space. One hand to the belly, one hand on to the low back. Just let this be concentrated in the hip that's still on the ground. It can be very humbling to realize how little hip extension you have. This is the anatomic term for the motion that we're doing right now. And so as I press my pelvis forward, I stop right about here, after which it starts to become a back bend. We're going to switch sides. Feel that on the other side. Notice how quickly you stop getting hip extension and you start to get low back extension, or how quickly you stop moving from the joint that's here at the bottom of your Speedos and how quickly you start to move from the joints that are above the waistband. Back toes are curled under. 3 options for standing. You can put one hand down to the ground to support you, one hand to your front knee, or just stand up from here, hands free. Rise all the way up, and in standing, we're going to do something really similar. So draw one knee up, lower down, and then the other. Just marching in place. And then settle your feet down nice and wide, kind of towards the edges of your yoga mat. Toes are going to naturally turn out. Actually, so this is a really important thing. So sometimes in yoga, we give so many directions for like exactly which angle to put your feet. We'll say outer edges of the feet parallel. We'll say turn your toes out 30 degrees or 45 degrees or whatever it is, 22 degrees. But the reality is, for movements that have some function, like if you're moving and you're trying to lift a heavy box, you want your feet to pretty much go where they're naturally going to go. Now, this isn't universally always the case, but for the most part, you want them to turn out a little bit in a natural way. Do try to keep the arches lifted. Do try to keep your toes spread and engaged. And then one hand to the chest, one hand to the belly. Start to bend your knees. Start to hinge at the hips, start to glide the hips backwards. It's going to feel like you're mooning whoever's behind you, the wall maybe. But this is going to keep your spine probably more neutral than otherwise. So if you were to look from the side, you can see that my legs are doing the vast majority of this work. One hand to your low back if you're not quite sure. And I would strongly recommend keeping your neck and your head in line with the rest of your spine. In fact, this is a good time to grab that dowel or broomstick or Swiffer. So you're going to bring the stick to touch your back in 3 base of, or rather your sacrum. So this is basically your butt crack, your upper back, between your shoulder blades. And these may be the only 2 spots that you get today, depending on your build, your structure. If your head is a few inches forward and it's not possible to bring it back without losing the rib cage contact or the pelvis contact, then these are the 2 to prioritize. If your head can touch the dowel, then you can also keep those 3 points of contact. So lots of space between the legs, full breath, drop down, hips back, rise up, glutes, squeeze. Drop down, let your hips go back, rise up, glutes, squeeze. This is the beginning of both a healthy squat. So a healthy squat is going to have a nice deep bend to the knees. And it's also the beginning of a deadlift in which we're not exactly squatting, but there's still going to be a little bit of a bend in your knees 99% of the time for most of us, right? Why is that? So a deadlift is, in essence, imagine this was something heavy, is to lower something down and to lift it back up using the strength of the legs. So if you keep your knees straight the whole time, you're actually creating some pretty intensive forces on your hips and your low back that aren't as efficient. The body is naturally going to have a little bit of a bend and then use the legs to come up. Now, a squat, as I mentioned, is going to be a bigger bend. And so whichever of those two movements you're doing, the squatting or the hip hinging deadlift, then you're going to want to really train these 3 points of contact to stay on the stick. We're going to do one more of these. Rise it up, keep the stick back there, and then step your feet into a small lunge, probably smaller than you would normally do in a yoga class. Bend into your front knee and back. Bend into your front knee and back. A couple things. You'll notice that I have my hand, one hand grabbing above my head and one hand grabbing kind of below the tailbone a little bit. That's a good hand position to keep this in place. Sometimes I see people try to hold it like this, and I don't think that that's quite as effective, but do that if you need to, with the both hands to the back. You'll notice very quickly that there's a part in this lunge where, like, pretty much if you go any further, your rib cage is going to pull off of the dowel. Let's switch sides. Most yoga lunges, therefore, are actually back bends because they're pulling your low back into a back bend, or your mid back into a back bend, or your entire spine into a back bend. Come back to neutral. Let's talk about Tadasana. So this stick is actually a really good feedback mechanism for what's known as Tadasana, or mountain pose, our foundational pose in yoga, our foundational standing pose. From Tadasana, very often teachers will teach to swan dive from the hips. Again, very similar to what I recommended with the deadlift, I would suggest absolutely taking a little bend in your knees here. It doesn't have to be a huge bend, but a little bend in your knees is going to help your spine to stay neutral. And then you can practice basically this hip hinge, this deadlift, inside of the sun salutation. And let me just set the dowel down for a moment to show you the alternative. So what's very often taught in yoga classes are feet closer together, legs stay straight. We'll go into a little bit of a back bend, and then we'll swan dive from the hips. Now, I will tell you that never in my entire life have I picked up something as relatively heavy as like a textbook like this. Like, it's just not happened. That's almost like a cartoon or a sitcom comedy, right? So we know that intuitively, we know that instinctively. So it just makes more sense to fold forward with your feet a little bit wider. This is more functional, it's more steady, and it makes more sense to have a little bit of a bend in your knees. And it is actually okay to look forward as you do this and to come into a little bit of a back bend. I would say that there are a lot of weightlifting instructors that actually do encourage that, and they probably have their reasons for that. However, what I would really strongly suggest is that before you veer outside of a neutral spine, including this, I would really teach yourself to know the neutral spine first and foremost. My understanding is that most people teaching weightlifting, instructing weightlifting, teach to lift your chest largely because a lot of us do this. And for those of you who, my dears, who are coming from the yoga perspective, there's a very good chance that you're going to do the opposite, right? So just find your neutral first, and then if there's good reason to lift your chest within it, go for it. I don't care. As long as it feels good, as long as it feels healthy and strengthening for you. Hopefully that made sense. So back to our neutral stuff. Tailbone / sacrum, upper back, back of the head. The back of the head's really important. Drift forward or down, your back starts to round. Your eyes, your cervical spine, your neck, and the entirety of your spine, the shape that it's in, are very much related. The moment you look up towards the ceiling, your entire back starts to back bend. This isn't a healthy body. And you can think about like an infant, how when an infant learns to lift their head off of the surface that they're on in tummy time, that's when they start to create a little bit of a back bend in their bodies. Like very truly, they didn't have that lumbar curve very often when they came out of the womb. So it's crawling and it's lifting your head that gives you the front curves of your spine. I know I'm talking a lot, so bear with me, but it is the neutrality of the head and the neck will determine a lot of the neutrality of the rest of your spine. So please avoid that temptation to look forward. We're going to instead use a yoga principle, which is that drishti. Look straight in front of you while you're in a neutral standing position, feet shoulder distance apart. As you take a little bend in your knees, as you maintain those 3 points of contact, your gaze drifts down in a line, down the wall, down to the space between your feet. Right back up, down the wall, down to the space between your feet. Right back up, down and up. And we're going to add one more funny thing to this movement, okay? And that is to cup your hand over your butt. So in theory, the biggest muscle that is working inside of this particular shape as you lower your body down to reach for something on the ground and lift up is your glutes, gluteus maximus in theory. So this is your hip extensor, and it's also working eccentrically or in a negative way as you lower down. As you stand back up, I want you to actually feel a concentrated squeeze happening here. That's why your hand is there. Lower it down, you're going to feel it get stretched out, and then rise up and feel the squeeze. Last one of these, because we've done a lot. Feel the squeeze. Okay. Take your dowel in front of you, and hopefully that made sense in your body. You're welcome to do a few of those on the other side. And if you'd like, you can do this with one hand and one hand on your low back. Start from a lifted, squeezing glutes position, and then hips back, keep the spine neutral, rise up. Go down to mid-shin if that works for you. And if it doesn't work for you, just stop wherever you start to feel your low back curving, okay? It could be knees, it could be mid-thigh, doesn't even matter. Just let your weight go into your heels and really practice what that is. So this is mindful movement using the principles of Tadasana, the principles of self-awareness, svadhyaya, and the principles of drishti, along with what we know to be true from neurology, neutral spine, neutral positioning of the head and neck has an impact on the rest of the spine. Go ahead and rise up, and let's set our dowels, broomsticks, etc. on the ground in front of you like so. And we're going to do one more version of this before we sort of move on to a more nourishing and well-rounded movement experience. So feet can be nice and wide here, like really go as wide as you feel comfortable. Shake it out a bit, and then just glide your arms forward. This is a great warm-up for downward facing dog. Glide forward and back, forward and back. At the top, please squeeze your glutes. And this is a really good one for those of you who felt like as you were going forward that your tendency was not the yoga tendency of back bending, but the rounding and excessive forces this way. So this is a really good one for those of you who have that tendency to practice. If you feel stiff in this movement, you can also hang out at the bottom of it and just shift your weight a little bit right and left. In fact, let's all do that whether Ardha, Upavista, Konasana, right? The wide-legged, wide angle pose of the legs. Allowing for a little bend. Breathing into wherever feels like it needs a little extra space in your rib cage, but not forcing anything and honoring your natural limits, honoring our neutral spine shape that we're reaching for here. Good. Drop fully into one side, drop fully into the other side, and then find neutral. Rise back up. We'll set the dowel, broomstick, Swiffer, whatever you have, down and off to the side. And then standing on your left leg, neutral spine, Tadasana, right leg lifts. Bend through the left knee. Go into the shape of that squat that I taught you earlier. Hips back, gaze is now down towards the floor. Set your right foot to the back of the mat. Draw yourself up. We are going to at some point go into a little bit of a back bend. Squeeze your shoulder blades here. Pulse a bit. And then hands to your torso, one hand to the chest, one hand to the belly. Lean it forward, press through the crown of the head, drop in, breath into the back body. Find that neutral shape. Lower your back knee slowly to the ground. You could also put your hand down or your hand to the block to make this happen and be safe for your knee. And then again, pulse a little here. Finding the edge of the movement that feels good at your hip before it goes into the low back. Take your front foot, wiggle it off to the side, pivot on your back knee, and just drop down and up, hinging at the hips. If you want truly open hips to be able to sit on the floor cross-legged with comfort, strengthening through all of the ranges of motion is the best way to make that happen. Return everything to neutral, facing forward. And again, you have the option of one hand to the floor, one or both hands to your front knee, or back toes curl under, step it forward, Tadasana. Roll your shoulders, reset ribs over the pelvis, engage your glutes. Stand on the right leg, draw your left knee high and down, and high and down, and high, and then bend through the standing knee. You can always use your left toes on the floor like a little kickstand. Your gaze is going down, your left foot stepping back, you're hinging at the hip here, right? So my spine is still neutral until we consciously come into the backbend lunge. Squeeze the shoulder blades back, float the chest. And then hands to the torso, lean it forward, find that neutral shape. I really feel this in my leg, and that's another good sign that it's happening in the correct place. Lower the back knee down, find your half kneeling, and then left hand to the left glutes. Just start to pulse forward, making sure that you're finding the natural stopping point that is related to your hip and not to your low back, right? And then we're going to pivot a little bit. So the front foot wiggles out to the side, back knee pivots a little bit, and it's like you're sitting back and up, sitting back and up. Lowering the baby gracefully down, lifting the baby up. You can tell I do not have a baby. Last one or two. And then as you rise, return it back to neutral. Lean forward, get your back knee off the ground. Option to use your hands anywhere as needed. And then step this back foot to the front. Full breath in. Go ahead and come out of neutral for a nice side bend to one side. And then side bends to the other side. And then hands to the back of the head, heart lifted. Neutral spine, totally spin to one side, just in a gentle twist. And then spin it to the other side. Gentle twist. Back to center. If you have any reason not to do the following movement, you don't have to, but we're going to roll ourselves down kind of vertebra by vertebra until we get close to the floor. So have your block within arm's reach and join me if you'd like, or just come down in a neutral spine because you know how to do that now. Chin, shoulders. What's really beautiful about this roll down for me is that I can feel places that I haven't articulated like this in a while. And the word articulate from Latin is related to joints. Place your block underneath where your pelvis is going to be if you're coming into sitting. And if you don't need the block, you can just drop straight into your deep yogi squat. Lower the hands to the floor. All of our joints are designed to move. Please don't get the impression that this practice it indicates that you need to have a neutral spine at all times. That's not true. But very often, in order to have efficient movement, we have to transfer the movement into the bigger joints. So imagine if I tried to open a door just like with my hand knuckles, right? It wouldn't make any sense. I wouldn't have a lot of leverage. I can move a little bit. I can move from my wrist. I can move from my forearm. But I'm much more capable of opening that door, that turning that doorknob if I use the more central, bigger joints that involve my shoulder, kind of my whole arm. That is what we're aiming for. From here, option to glide a rolled up blanket under your thighs. And if you're coming down onto your back, lower yourself down, engaging through the core to root yourself back onto your back. If you're going to stay in seated meditation, which is my preference, please join me in that if you prefer. We have a few moments of quiet, of stillness, of getting to the true heart of yoga. Please bring one hand over your heart if you're in seated, or place your hands wherever feels good if you are on your back. On one of your next exhales, invite your eyelids to get heavy. Watch your breathing slow down a little bit, focusing on the exhale. Just notice any thoughts that come up, letting them float by like clouds. Returning your awareness, immersing your awareness as best as you can into your breath, into the sensations of the present moment. Watching your breath, and if you are ready to begin the re-emergence, start to deepen your breath. And allow your next few breaths to travel to your fingers, to your toes, initiating movement at the hands, feet, ankles, and wrists. If you're on your back, slowly draw your knees to your chest, rocking over to whatever side would feel good. We'll all meet in seated, one hand over the heart, one hand over the belly. Breathing into the goodness that you are. Breathing into the ribs three-dimensionally to ease any low back pain. Breathing into the power of our legs. We'll press the palms together in gratitude for the ways that we're connected now and forever across the world. We bow down. Thank you for this practice. Thank you for being here and sharing it with me.